For teaching Standard 3 subject and curriculum knowledge, I decided to focus on improving my hockey knowledge. So hockey is a sport that is on my NQT school's curriculum, and having never played it myself and having never had any experience teaching it, I felt like this was the most pressing aspect of my knowledge that needed improving. So with this in mind, and my lack of prior experience, my main thing that I was concerned about in terms of the impact this would have on my pupils' progress was the fact that I would be unable to differentiate my content and delivery and questions in relation to both higher ability students and being able to sufficiently stretch them, and obviously lower ability students who may struggle or may have never even held a hockey stick before. So with a lack of physically or technically transferable skills from other sports, I feel like hockey might be an area that certain pupils will struggle to grasp. So with this in mind, the first thing I looked to do was to find out the context of hockey in terms of the curriculum. So as an evasion sport, I hope to be able to help pupils by drawing on other evasion sports, so that even if they don't necessarily have the stick skills, I can still provide content that stretches them and challenges them to achieve learning objectives, which I believe would be helpful, and how they can use other sports in order to do this. So once I found out from a tactical and physical perspective what hockey might be assessed on in light of, I also then looked at developing my understanding of hockey from a technical and tactical perspective. So I looked at the content that GB Hockey put out there in terms of attacking and defensive principles, then looked at a key technical breakdown of the skills, and then looked to map this against a head, heart, and hands framework, as this is becoming popular in a lot of schools. And I'm yet to hear back from my NQT school as to how they assess their pupils, but I'm aware that there will be changes to their curriculum and how they go about assessing pupils given the current climate. So here's a quick technical breakdown of key skills such as holding the stick, passing, shooting, dribbling, and tackling, as well as some resource cards which I think will be useful not just to myself but to pupils who hockey is not familiar with, alongside rules of the game and some example games. I also thought this hockey assessment kit was pretty useful, as it allows me very easy framework with which to differentiate for higher ability players. So for example, lower ability pupils I now know might be receiving passes at slow speeds and typically on one side because of the nature of the sport, whereas higher ability pupils might be receiving the ball on the reverse side, and equally might be doing this at pace while still being able to scan the field, whereas lower ability pupils might find themselves drawn to looking at the ball. It also gives me a nice framework in terms of gradually building pupils up from less open drills to competitive fixtures if appropriate. So I found that pretty useful, alongside some example games to at least get me started in terms of understanding how to connect my learning objectives through to some example activities. So I've just highlighted some key points here, and it also gives me a nice framework for perhaps the order in which to develop specific skill sets. What it also does is gives me a framework for enhancing the skills and abilities of higher ability pupils. So in terms of technique cards, again, these are useful not just for my pupils, but for myself as well, as it'll give me a key frame of reference and allow me to promote pupil outcomes. As I said, I might not be able to fall back on my own knowledge the same way I would be able to with other sports. So it's also going to help keep pupils safe, as well as providing a go-to frame of reference rather than disrupting the flow of the lesson to have to ask myself as an example. So as I said, I've popped key technique points onto these documents, just so that when we're focusing on a specific skill, that can be my go-to resource for the lesson, and as well as providing other tips for students. So again, I'd probably introduce those, I'd probably stagger those, and then we can start to work on games that work on that. So in terms of what that might look like in a lesson plan, so here's a lesson plan I've designed for pupils who may not have had any prior experience of hockey. So this is probably what I'd use as an introductory lesson. So my aims here was just to get students familiar with the body position of holding the stick and what this might look like when they pass, when they send and receive the ball. So what I'd look to do with this lesson is see if they can connect previous learning from other evasion sports and understanding how their body position, both in relation to receiving the ball and their position on the pitch, might allow them to create attacking opportunities. Within this lesson, what I'd look to do is provide a framework for what higher ability pupils might or should be encouraged to be doing alongside the rest of the class. So I've looked at higher ability questions. I look to use games that disguise the positioning of the body and the stick, and also look to keep this quite games focused. What I've tried to do as well is use my improved hockey knowledge to provide means of easier and harder variations of each task. So for example, with the tails and teams games, where one team are becoming overly dominant, their tails might be worth more than other pupils. So then these more skilled players are then having to deal with more players trying to defend or close them down. And equally, this might give a little bit more time on the ball to players who perhaps are a little bit weaker. I'd also use my observations of pupils in terms of who can get into space, who can consecutively execute a consistent passing technique, to then further differentiate when we go on to other aspects of the lesson. So for example, players who were able to achieve more passes or create and find space a lot more easily would then have more defenders in subsequent drills, so it's going to be harder for them to create attacking opportunities. And likewise, on the flip side of that, pupils who struggle to complete consecutive passes may go into an uncontested game to allow themselves more time on the ball to execute the key passing techniques that we've gone over. It's also a good opportunity for me to incorporate some AFL activities and to quickly assess the extent to which pupils have encountered hockey before. So for example, a show and tell example where pupils are in pairs and they then have to verbally or physically maneuver their partner into a position to receive the ball. At a quick glance, this will give me an idea of whether pupils understand the first learning objective, which is to demonstrate a body position in relation to holding the stick and receiving a pass. And then equally, this will then take us into a width to win game, so encouraging pupils to use the wide areas and seeing how they can possibly use width as a means of creating attacking opportunities, and whether they can use passes out wide in order to do this. And equally, with my improved hockey knowledge, now I can either have players on the wings who are then unopposed, or that's then a safe area to allow them more time to develop the stick skills that they need to. Equally, if that's too easy for pupils, then either A, the wings can be removed, or B, they can be opposed. There can be contention of the ball rather than these players being unopposed. Equally, I've got higher ability questions in here. So for example, where teams are of equal numbers, how can we still create an overload? So players who are of higher ability might talk about isolating specific areas of the pitch the same way that they would do in other evasion games. Equally, a higher ability pupil, this might be a pupil who, yes, they might not have the stick skills, but they've got that tactical brain from other evasion sports that they've excelled at. And finally, we could go into a game where the conditions are removed. Can the players still use, for example, wide areas to create attacking opportunities? Are their passes still consistent when we go into a game-based scenario? Are they still looking to create overloads? And this is something at the end of the lesson I could then differentiate my plenary. So for example, for the lower ability pupils, it might simply be that they're recreating those body positions to send and receive the ball. They might create this in a sequence. For middle ability pupils, they might be talking about whether they think they've applied the techniques consistently and how they think they know this. And for higher ability pupils, they might talk about how they're using their passing to create attacking opportunities. So again, rather than passing into close to someone's feet, they might pass into space. So that's one of my lessons on hockey that I've designed. There's a few example games that I've created, which I would then, of course, link to specific aspects of the curriculum. I would also try, where possible, to link this to other evasion games that we're using similar terminology, where we're talking about attacking and defensive principles, because it's likely that pupils will be able to draw on this prior knowledge. We can talk about strong sides and weak sides in terms of defending in hockey, because this is going to be relevant to having a stronger and a weaker side in evasion sports that I'm perhaps more familiar with. And finally, in terms of, for example, recognizing these skills within the game, just a quick bingo resource. So this could be given to a non-doer within the lesson, or it could just simply be my way of sitting back and observing which pupils are able to find space, which pupils are preparing their hockey stick to receive the ball effectively, which pupils are able to demonstrate their passing technique consistently. And what I believe would be the overall impact of my improved hockey knowledge is that pupils are better able to draw on previous knowledge learned in evasion games. I would be better able to draw on these central themes and develop them within a hockey specific context. I'd also be able to ask differentiated questions of higher and lower ability pupils. And I'd also be able to stretch and challenge those who are more able, while supporting pupils who perhaps haven't had enough time to develop their hockey skills sufficiently enough. So having improved my hockey knowledge and my understanding of key principles, techniques and rules within the game, I would expect to see my pupils better able to recognize key technical points. I'd expect them to be able to at least recognize and hopefully apply aspects of other evasion sports within a hockey context, such as driving into space, staying away from the defenders, and other attacking and defensive principles.